I'm Jennifer Gilmour, and I'm an author and advocate for women in abusive relationships. I want to get to the answers to the questions that many have from those that work in the domestic abuse sector, getting an inside feel of what it's really like in their job role and sharing it with all of you. Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Abuse Talk Interviews. I'm delighted today to have Zoe Parsons with me. In fact, she has tweeted with us on Abuse Talk before and has been around on the web, haven't you? So I'm really delighted to actually meet you in the virtual world right now. And we are going to be discussing narcissistic abuse today. There's been a ton of questions come in, so we're going to try and get through as many as we can. But don't worry if we don't answer your questions. We're thinking about maybe doing a second recording or an episode to follow on from it. So keep an eye out for that. I want to say before we start, thank you to Rockpool. They're the main sponsor for Abuse Talk, and they deliver trauma-informed programs and recovery toolkits for domestic abuse, for ACEs, and for different things. So check them out at rockpool.life. And I also want to thank patrons, because I do have a Patreon account, and I've got a special Abuse Talk tier. So we've got Katrina Hay and Susan Rahima on there supporting it, so thank you guys. If you want to find it, you can look up Jennifer Gilmour on Patreon and you'll find it. But we're here to talk about narcissistic abuse, and I said that really positive. It's not really a positive conversation to have, is it, Zoe?
Not really, no.
But Zoe has got a wealth of experience, and we're going to start unpicking it. So, Zoe, before we get into the questions, can you just tell us a bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a survivor myself. I was in an abusive relationship where I experienced everything: emotional, physical, sexual, financial abuse. I have a child with him. He's actually in prison for what he did to me. So he got sentenced to 11 and a half years for ABH, harassment and rape. So as part of basically my healing process, because what I found is just trying to educate yourself, trying to understand really what's happened, was where I started. And I just found that, I mean, this was like 4.5, 5 years ago now. And I just found that there wasn't a huge amount of information and mainly emotional support out there where you can get help from someone who actually understands what you've been through. Because when you're healing from being in an abusive relationship, it's not a normal breakup. It's not just your heart that's broken. It's actually your spirit. And it goes a lot deeper than what your friends and family are thinking about. So I'm trained and I got certified, first of all, as a Freedom Program facilitator. So I was running support groups. And then I started posting on my Instagram page, and I had so many people contacting me. I was like, how can I do this in a more official capacity? So I got my certification as a life coach and a counsellor, and I've set up my practice, which is self-love after abuse, because in my experience, I found, apart from educating yourself, self-love is so important. And I'm not talking a bubble bath or that type of thing. I'm talking the self-love that emotionally heals you. And really, that's now what I do. I just help men and women who have been in these types of situations understand, heal, and then basically go on and thrive. And I think because I've been there, I've experienced it all. I mean, we was chatting earlier, and I mean, I've experienced the whole range of abuse. I've experienced family court, criminal court. I've had to relocate, so I've had to start my life from scratch. So I have experienced and I do understand. So it's like when you talk with me, I'm coming from a place of really knowing and feeling what you're going through.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's been a pleasure to listen to your journey before, just talking and unpicking the familiarities between services, etc. So we're here to discuss narcissistic abuse specifically, but I thought it'd be really good to really, what is it? Because maybe we don't all understand the true definition of
Yeah.
narcissism.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I kind of feel that the words narcissist, or you hear everyone saying, "Oh, my ex is a narc," and it's kind of, the word is thrown around quite casually, but actually what narcissism is it's a personality disorder which has to get diagnosed by a professional. And to be diagnosed with this personality disorder, so it's narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, in total there are 9 narcissistic traits, and to be diagnosed a person needs to be displaying 5 or more.
Right.
So for someone to be a true narc, they have to display 5 or more of these characteristics. But that doesn't mean that you might be in a relationship with someone who's maybe displaying 1, 2, 3, or 4 of them.
Right.
That doesn't mean that your experience with that person is any less hurtful or less valid. It just means that from a clinical psychological diagnosis, technically they're not a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have narcissistic traits. Some obviously will have between 1 or maybe the 9, so it's kind of on a scale. So if you think about it, it's called the scale of sociopathy, and you've got like someone who's going to have narcissistic traits here, going up the scale to someone who's narcissistic, to someone who's a sociopath, to someone who's a psychopath. And
Right.
basically the further along the scale they are, the main thing that's going to impact you as a person is they're going to have less empathy. That is the main thing that you're really going to notice about. They're going to have less empathy and they're going to be more selfish. So if you're in a relationship with someone who has no empathy, is really selfish, who has a grandiose complex, who kind of feels that they're always right, maybe feels that basically they are God, right? Because some do. Obviously these type of behaviors, when they're dealing with you, it's going to be very emotional and mental. And the thing is with narcissism is it's something that generally develops when that person is a child. So it's how the brain develops, and it's normally as a result of 1 or 2 things. So it's either because that child has been in an abusive family, so whether that's neglectful, physical, or sexual type of abuse, or it's because they've been in a family where they've been spoiled essentially, and they've not been set boundaries. They've learned entitlement, that they can have whatever they want whenever they want. They're never disciplined. And what it does is these 2 types of environments will make a child's brain develop in a certain way, and it emphasizes these narcissistic traits that we all have to a point that they become more. So I'm not saying that this is an excuse for their behavior, because obviously as humans we all have a choice, right? So we can choose to behave or not behave in a certain way, but on a psychological level, this is how basically a narcissist grows or becomes.
Right, okay. So obviously we've talked about, and we've talked about it, and you've mentioned it just then, about the fact that the word narc and my narc ex is being spread around. It's like a buzzword at the moment. Why do you think it is? Why are people using that terminology?
I think it's just easy to kind of describe someone in like a kind of off the cuff sort of way without fully understanding the complexity of actually what narcissism is. So, I mean, to get a narcissistic diagnosis, obviously a person would have to go to a psychologist, and because narcs don't think that there's anything wrong with them, these kind of diagnoses are really hard to come by. So Yeah, there are definitely more narcissists out there than statistically we're told, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your ex, because he was selfish and didn't take the bins out, that doesn't make him a narc. That just makes him a prat, right? You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not narcissistic behavior. It's kind of, but I just think people have heard the word, they like the sound of it, and they've just jumped on it. And in a way, I feel that because it is so widely used now to
Mm,
describe behavior that is selfish and stupid and just general ignorant behavior, that essentially if the person wanted to, they could change that behavior, right?
mhm,
And that's the difference between someone who's a narcissist and someone who's not. So a narcissist will never change. They don't feel that there's anything wrong with them, and they will continue doing what they're doing irrespective.
mm,
Whereas someone who might have narcissistic traits, they might go, you know what, I'm really not happy with how my behavior is impacting my partner. I can really see that it's damaging, and I do want to change. And
mm.
then obviously you're going to see the change. We're not talking about a narcissist using, oh, I want to change as a way to manipulate, because
Yes.
when people say they're going to change, you want to see action after the words, right? That's
Mm,
the only way you can fully prove that someone is doing what they say, is by
mm.
action. So, but
I
yeah, I
guess
do
as
think going
well.
back,
I guess as well, like it takes away the seriousness of that form of
totally,
abuse. Um,
totally,
and so then, for those who are saying, this is something I've experienced, and actually have that as part of them and their story, then that understanding then is washed out, isn't it? Because people
totally.
just have an idea in their head which is maybe not the correct idea.
Totally. And obviously, if you have genuinely been with someone who's got 3, 4, 5, 6 of these narcissistic traits, maybe all 9 of them, your experience and the damage that it does to you is going to be so much worse than someone who is just saying, oh, my boyfriend or my ex is such a narc, he was so selfish, he never cooked me dinner.
Mm,
And it totally, like you're saying, it totally invalidates your experience.
mm,
And also I think it puts a limit on the places where you can really go to get help,
yeah.
because people don't understand, what narcissism is and what narcissistic abuse is, and the damage that it really does to you as a person. And it's kind of, oh, it's fine, my ex was a narc as well, and it's like, well, actually, and then you're into that whole thing of comparing
Yeah, and
who's
justifying.
exactly, and it's like, well, my abuse was worse and he did this, and then they're like, oh yeah, but and it's like the last thing you need and want is to be going into that
Mm,
whole type of comparison of abuse, because ultimately it's irrelevant, because you're the one who experienced that abuse, and you're the most important person in your life. So what you experienced compared to someone else really doesn't matter, because you experienced it and they didn't.
mm. Right, well, as I say, we have got a bunch of questions, and I've tried to put them together to sort of maybe link together, so hopefully this will
Okay.
help. I'm asking them all anonymously as well, so for those who are watching, they'll probably have to listen to hear their question. So I think we might have touched on this, but somebody's asked, is it possible to recover from their abuse, and can you take on some of their traits yourself?
So yes, it's totally possible to cover from narcissistic abuse. I mean, I myself I'm proof of that. I would say, I mean, my ex, he wasn't clinically diagnosed, but I know from what I know now that I would say that he's a narcissistic sociopath, and
Mm,
I've healed and I'm thriving. So you can do it, but it takes specific support, and you need to be working with someone or having the right type of information to understand the mindset. Because the mindset of a narcissist, when you understand why they behave how they do, it's actually quite enlightening and totally empowering, and it can help you move forward in your journey. With regards catching narcissism or becoming one yourself, then the answer is no, you wouldn't. Quite often what happens is while you're in that relationship, you will do what's called reactive abuse, where you respond to the abuse that you're experiencing, and then they will turn round and say, oh, you're such an abuser, you're such a knock, because you might have actually been the one that's turned around and hit them. I mean, I remember an instance with my ex. We was arguing. We was in the kitchen. I got a knife from the door, and I so wanted to stab him. And like I held it, and he just laughed at me. And he was like, "Oh, you're so violent with me. What are you gonna do with that knife?" And and I was just like, "Yeah, what am I gonna do with this knife? It's like, this is ridiculous." But I was the one with the knife. He wasn't the one with the knife, yet he was the one that had been abusing me. So if the police had been called at that point in time, then obviously I would have been the one arrested, because I was the one with a weapon, not him. And yet I'm definitely not an abuser. So you do react, but that doesn't make you a not, because essentially the difference, I think I mentioned it before, the difference between a narcissist and not a narcissist is they don't care. They're not prepared to change. They don't see anything wrong in their behavior, and they don't feel bad about it. Whereas in my instance, I had that knife and I felt terrible afterwards. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? This is really bad. This isn't me. Why did I do that? And then you beat yourself up because you're just so shocked by your own behavior, right?
And that in itself, to what you're saying with that, because I remember somebody telling me, if you put a dog in a cage and every day you go up and you just poke them, maybe you don't feed them very well or everything, and they're locked up in this little cage, and one day when you finally let them out, what are they going to do? They're going to bite you, because
exactly.
And that's the only way I can really explain it to people when those situations sort of come about. But thank you for sharing that, because that is obviously a personal part of your journey. But I'm sure there will be many people that relate to it as well. And it's really difficult to not react or want to do something.
Yes, exactly. Especially when you're in the relationship, and even when you're out of the relationship, because ultimately these people, they know what buttons to press. So what to someone else might seem a normal comment, to you, it's highly personal, and it makes you react to it in a certain way, which is one of, I mean we're going to digress a bit, but it's one of the reasons why when you go to family court, it's so hard to prove this type of coercive, emotional, narcissistic abuse, because a lot of the time it's very covert. And unless you have the back history of your personal life, a judge isn't going to understand the off-the-cuff comments that they would have said, essentially.
Or the way they look, or there's a signal. It could be anything, isn't it? Right. Exactly. So we've got another question. I have read some psychologists scoff at how the term bandied about today, arguing that there are actually very few narcissists. So are there differences between a narcissist and someone who displays narcissistic tendencies? If so, what are they? So I think you've covered that generally. Did you have any other the traits or whatever that would show the differences?
To be honest, I kind of feel that often we get hung up on the term and what's actually involved in it, but ultimately what's important is how that person makes you feel, because whether or not they're a narcissist, if they're making you feel confused, controlled, scared, isolated, just feeling that you're generally anxious, those are unhealthy behaviors in any relationship. And whether or not that person is a narcissist or not, if you are feeling that way, then that's when you need to take action, because that's what I would say to indicates that your relationship is toxic, is abusive, however you want to label it, whether or not they're a narcissist. I mean, for me, when I speak with my clients, I mean, obviously when we have sessions, they'll talk about things and I'll be like, well, that's definitely a narcissistic trait, and they've probably done this, because the thing is with narcissists is their mindset and their behaviors is very similar. So for instance, on my Instagram, I'll post content regularly explaining and answering questions like, why does a narcissist leave their belongings, and it's like, why do they do that? Because they all have a similar pattern of behavior. So it's like, once you understand that and you get the answer to that question, it can help you move on and heal. So
yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so I've got another one here. I'm curious if there is any scientific research on a narcissistic origins. So obviously we've sort of covered that a bit. Are they born that way or nurtured that way? And obviously that person is, obviously experienced some kind of narcissism, but they're, looking at if that is the way they're born or whether that's the way they're nurtured. But I think you've just said it there, really, haven't you?
Yeah, and I actually think this is an important question, because if you have a child with someone who's narcissistic, it can be really worrying, because I've got a daughter with mine, right? And I was like, oh my God, does this mean that she's inherited these traits, these behaviors? Am I going to end up being abused by her like I was him? And basically the answer is no, because the children, it's dependent on the environment that the children grow in. So if you're providing an emotionally supportive, disciplined, structured family home, then your child's going to grow up fine.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's reassuring to hear as well, isn't it, for those that maybe have had that experience. So why is narcissism not recognised as a formal personality disorder? So obviously you mentioned it was, but they're saying about the understanding of a formal diagnosis, and it's not recognised by science.
So it is recognised by science. So psychologically, you've got two personality disorders, which is narcissism and sociopath. And then when you go into being a psychopath, it's classed as an antisocial personality disorder. Right. So people like Ted Bundy, they were psychopaths. They had an antisocial personality disorder. Right. And that's obviously the extreme of this scale. So if you think about what I said earlier about the scale, you've got kind of basically the whole range of people there, but it's only when you've got 5 or more of the 9 traits would you go into a diagnosis. But as I said earlier, getting a diagnosis is hard.
Yeah, and I suppose where would you even get a diagnosis? What point would the police, intervene and request it? Would the family courts intervene and request it? Or is it something you have to sort of section them? Or how would you get it?
To be honest, I think most times you're going to get a diagnosis is you're still with them and they're saying you need to do family couples counselling.
Yeah.
And obviously couples counselling generally is a tactic of abuse, and anyone who's abusive genuinely will just use that as a means to get more information to use against you, especially if they're narcissists. And maybe during that session, if the psychologist isn't taken in by their mask that they're wearing, because you have to remember that narcissists, they wear a mask and they're very good at presenting one way publicly to a different way at home, and they can maintain these masks for a period of time. And it's while they were wearing this mask, that's when we fell in love with them, right? So it's like they can bamboozle people and professionals into thinking something that they're not. So I think in most cases a diagnosis would probably come up there, like you say, maybe if during the court proceedings you can get a psychologist to give an assessment, maybe while they're in prison or if they're sectioned or whatever, but it's generally something forced. So I mean, someone like you or I, we know that we might need extra support, and we'll go, you know what, I'm going to go to someone like Zoe, I'm going to get my counselling, and I'm going to get the extra support I need to heal and understand and move on from this. Whereas a narcissist would never do that because they think they're fine.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Right, we've got a personal question. She's given me two. So, is there any way of getting a narcissist to see the impact of their behaviour? She's put, I'm not expecting change, just would be good to see if they could actually see it.
So they already know what they're doing. They know what they're doing and they don't care. So you expending your energy trying to have conversations and discussions with a narcissist is actually a waste of your time and your energy, which is actually what they want, because narcissists, they're all about getting emotional supply. This is what they want, right? They are essentially empty and they can't self-regulate this or self-produce this. So for instance, you or I, if we feel sad, we'll do something to make ourselves happy, right? And you can self-generate feelings. Whereas with a narcissist, they can't do that. And they need to get that form of energy off someone else. So when they're with you, they will make you sad, they will make you angry, they will make you happy, they will make you sexually aroused, they will make you tired. Whatever it is that produces energy, they will manufacture that within the relationship, so they can basically suck it out of you. So yeah, I mean, they know what they're doing. So I personally, I would recommend conserving your energy and not even bothering.
Right, okay. And somebody, the same lady has asked, on what level does the narcissist intend to harm others, or are we just a means to their end?
So yeah, I think I probably answered that. We're just a means to their end. They are so selfish. They don't look at us. It's basically, if you've seen The Matrix, you know how basically everyone was plugged in so that the energy could be fed off for a certain amount of people. It's a similar type of mindset to that. It's like they don't look at you as someone who has feelings and is hurt, and they don't feel remorse about that type of stuff. As far as they're concerned, you're there to serve them, to give them what they need, to basically use you. And it's one of the reasons why narcissists will cheat, because they need that constant supply. And the longer you're with a narcissist, the more tired and drained you're going to become, and the less you're going to be able to give. So they are constantly working and looking for a new source, essentially.
Okay. So thank you for that. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. But it's like bad news, isn't it, really? But
I know
somebody's asked, obviously it's quite a personal question as well, why does it mess with your brain so much, even if you weren't abused physically or sexually? And is it damaging or worse? So I think, obviously, thinking about even coercive control and like the psychological aspect of things, and then just the physical elements and separating them, it's often spoken about how, physical abuse, coercive control is, a lot, worse. It has a deeper impact. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that once you've experienced, to heal from emotional, mental, verbal abuse, however we want to label it, it takes years. Whereas I know with my ex, like, he attacked me and I ended up having to have 12 stitches in my face, and it's like the scar within 6 months had healed, and now you virtually can't see it. And yet it probably took me about 2 years of intensive work and therapy to get to a place where I was not having the panic attacks, not having the nightmares, not having the flashbacks. I had recovered from the PTSD that I was diagnosed with, and that's the stuff that does take a really long time to heal. And I think when you're with your friends and family, that's the stuff that they don't understand, because I mean, we mentioned earlier, I was saying that this isn't a normal breakup. You're not just with a broken heart, you're healing with a broken spirit, because the tactics that these people use, they're torture tactics, and they really, really damage you internally. And yeah, the psychological damage is really hard. But like I said, just because you have been on the receiving end of that, it doesn't mean you can't heal from it, because you can. With the right support and information, you can totally recover from it. But it's hard work, definitely.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of focus as well. So once you take your eye off the game of like that recovery mode and that side of it, you sort of tend to go back to your old ways in thinking and responding when you're it's like it takes energy to recover just as much as it takes energy to deal with the abuse that you experienced.
Definitely. And
go on,
sorry. One other thing, sorry. Also, what happens with when you've been in this type of relationship, I don't know, you've probably heard the term trauma bond.
Yeah.
So this bond is basically a physiological and chemical reaction that's created within your body. And I'm not going to go into it too much. If anyone wants to know more about trauma bond, then message me. But it basically makes you addicted to them. And this isn't something that you're necessarily aware of. It's a chemical response that's happening to how they've treated you. So when you get the highs and lows within the relationship, all types of hormones and chemicals get released within your brain, which create a reaction in your body, which essentially creates this trauma bond, which then makes it really hard to leave. It's why you might go back. So it totally causes an emotional response, but it creates a physiological response as a result of the abuse.
Yeah, would you say that's similar to being dependent of that person then, out of interest? So having that dependency on them to make decisions, choices, finances, it's like kind of a similar thing.
A similar thing. So I mean, really how a trauma bond works is you know that this person is hurting you and treating you bad, but you still look to them to give you support and comfort. So it's like they might have made you cry, but you still want them to hug you to make it feel better.
Yeah.
And it causes this kind of cognitive dissonance within your brain, so that although you know logically one thing, you feel and you behave in a different way. And it's basically, so when you do break up and you manage to get out and you're looking at healing, talking about the emotional side, it's like you're having to rewire your brain, because how they've basically, however long you've been with them, they've wired your brain to respond to them and react and accept certain behaviors that you probably wouldn't have before. But during the relationship and along with everything else, I mean, we're just talking about one aspect of the control within a relationship that makes it hard. And obviously, when you're leaving, it's why you probably see people are going, oh, no contact, but it's really hard. Why is no contact so important? Does it really matter? And there's all these kind of phrases that we hear, but we don't necessarily understand the reasons why. And a lot of it is to do with rewiring that brain that's gone from here, and we need to put it back to here, essentially.
Yeah, and it's like we've spoken, it's definitely not an easy subject or easy thing to sort of unpick and then put back together in different places or things like that. So somebody said they've got no questions to ask because they're still trying to escape, but they would like some advice on, you know, that side of it, of escaping. Maybe that if they get educated a bit on it, that they'll be able to, you know, get away from that relationship. So I don't know what advice you can give to somebody who's looking to escape.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they've written that question is really good, because it shows that they've got a level of awareness that
Yeah.
something is wrong within their relationship, you know, and that's such an important step, because quite often you're in these relationships. I know with mine, it took me a really long time to actually identify what was happening, and then I was like, and then you make excuses and you kind of give them second chances, and you say it's because they're stressed, or it was the alcohol, or whatever it is. But I know a book I found really helpful is, before I attended the Freedom Program, I just bought the book on the Kindle and I read it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Freedom Program by Pat Craven. So that's really informative.
Mm-hmm.
And another really good book to read is Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men by Lundy Buncroft.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read that book, I basically took a highlighter and I went through, and all the behaviors that I saw as my ex, I highlighted, because in my mind, I was like, this can't be an abusive relationship. It's just because of whatever. But when I got halfway through the book and I saw that pretty much everything was highlighted, I was like, you know what? This is not normal, and
Yeah.
I need to be doing something, and there's steps I need to take. So yeah, education is key. Definitely educate yourself. But the one thing I will say is, if you are thinking of leaving, make a safety plan and prepare. Document everything that's going on just in case you need it, especially if you've got children. Make a safety plan. If you need help with this, contact me, because I can give you a list of the type of things that you would need to prepare for and start kind of getting ready, because statistically they say that when a woman leaves, that is actually the most dangerous time. So you have to remember that ultimately you have to take care of yourself, and you have to do this in a manner where you are safe. It's really important. But yeah, definitely educate yourself. So read those 2 books. Contact me if you want any extra support, or you want the list of things that you need. And yeah,
No, thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, we've got a bunch of questions left, but I know we're going to have to sort of come to a close. So I think what might be good is to do a part 2 for this.
Okay.
Because there's so much to unpack, and to be honest, the questions that have been asked are quite diverse. So I want to say thank you, Zoe, for spending your time.
You're welcome.
These questions today. And actually, what we're going to do is, if you head over to #AbuseTalk on Twitter, we're going to discuss narcissistic abuse, because I think it'd be really good to unpick everything we've heard from Zoe and sort of continue that discussion about that particular form of abuse. We can discuss what we've heard, what we've learned, and also our opinions on the matter, because as everybody knows, we're all a non-judgmental community and we're all allowed our own opinions on it. So Zoe, thank you so much, and we will look at a date in the diary to reschedule, but I really appreciate your time and going into so much detail about narcissism and that form of abuse, so thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a horrible topic, but I do think that the more people understand it and the mindset behind it, then it is freeing. I mean, I post about this stuff on my social media channels just so that people can basically learn, because I would say the first step to freeing yourself from it is educating yourself, definitely.
Well, yeah, that was another thing. Where can people find you? Because I know we're going to do another one, but let's talk about where we can find you in the meantime. So what social media channels, etc.
So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you'll find me under Self Love After Abuse. If you want to connect with me personally, then obviously that's Zoe Parsons. And if you want to go to my website, I've got some blogs on there and some information that you might find helpful. That is www.selfloveafterabuse.com. So yeah, send me a message. I'm always kind of connecting with people and just answering odd questions, because, you know, I know how alone you feel when you're in this situation, and I don't want anyone to feel they're alone, because they're not. There are people out there that can help you and support you.
No, well, thank you so much. And what I'll do is I'll pop all the information in the description of this video and podcast. So if you head to there, and I will also pop the links to the books that Zoe's referenced as well, so that you can just literally click on through. So thank you again.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.